So when we do a review of what government is and where it's come from in our history, it is important to keep in mind that authority and government are related but have two separate ideas behind them. To keep in mind that government is simply just the people or some type of institution like our Congress, our president, that are carrying out the needs, wants, and policies for the people, whereas the authority, that's what is giving them a legal power over us, for them to give us orders to enforce the rules that they also put in place. Looking at where government may get its authority to rule, think about yourself being in charge of a group of people. A couple ways that you could go about thinking about it is if you look at our 5 types of power, if you happen to be a persuasive person, think about your parents for a possibility when they ask you to simply make your bed or clean your room. They're holding a higher standard than you are. Being your parent, you're probably going to listen to them. If we take a coercive viewpoint of power, I'm basically threatening you to do something. The good part of it is some people respond very well, but for the most part, if you are very coercive in what you're trying to achieve, people tend to want to get rid of you. And this time you usually see like a coup or you see an assassination happen because people don't like to be bossed around. Whereas if you're more persuasive in what you want, there's a very cordial and like-minded view from both parties. The other types of power that we might have, we look at somebody that is an expert in a field, and the thinking is if you know what you're doing very well, people are going to listen and want to follow you. Experts sometimes, if they use this to gain power, tend to be overconfident and maybe they think what they can do is above and beyond their realistic capabilities. Another type of power that tends to be very well liked with a leader is a referent type of power. And this is somebody that is very businesslike, but also very friendly with the people under them. And there's a mutual respect for one another. You look at a legitimate leader, if you ever hear that, people like that individual very much. They will do anything that they need just because that person is so kind morally and what they're trying to achieve. The last type of power, and you've probably seen this in a classroom, is a reward system where if you do something for me, I give you something in return. Reward system tend not to work out long term because people get sick of the same rewards. You tend to run out of good things to get you to keep moving forward. So again, if I was in the classroom and I reward my students by, hey, if everybody does their homework, I'll bring you a donut. At some point you get sick of eating donuts and you just say, it's the reward's not changing, it's not good enough anymore, I'm sick of doing homework, and you stop doing it. So these are our 5 types of powers. Think about, if you were a leader, which one of these 5 would you want to have to get people to follow you, and what are the advantages or disadvantages of gaining your power through one of these 5 ways? As we go through history and we start to really formalize where governments have come from in the past, going all the way back to the caveman days, the idea that evolution has helped play a part in this is really important to understand how we got to, let's say, our American democracy today. Back in the caveman days, you had very small families that would live together for survival. And the best way to continue to live would be that, for example, the oldest male would tell everyone else in the family what their role was for survival. Who would collect the food, who would go hunt, who would take care of their little cave home. So all of these things led to the people surviving. Now, as we move forward, keep in mind, populations increase. So no longer will a small family head of state type thing work as population increases. Now, as we said, as population starts to increase, we have a little bit of conflict on who should be in charge. So as our families get larger and different family groups come in contact with one another, there's going to be a fight on who should be in charge. And what you see is this idea of force being used to get somebody to obey and follow you. If we look at when Europeans first came in contact and started to colonize different parts of the world, if they had a stronger weapon to use, for example, a gun, it was much easier to force somebody to follow your rules. If you look in the 20th century, for example, this idea of fear being used, so Nazi Germany, and forcing somebody to abide by what Nazism was looking to do inside Germany. If you didn't follow, you were executed. And this was a simple way to say, hey, we're in charge. Unless you're stronger than me or you have a bigger army than me, you're not going to tell me what to do. There are tons of downsides to this theory. If you look at today where force has been used on people to take control of a government, those countries typically fall into chaos. You have a ton of coups, you have a ton of revolutions taking place. People are trying to escape those regions of the world because it is so harsh and brutal. And if you don't follow the rules of the ruling party, then again, you could be executed, or you're not going to receive basic supplies like food, water, or even have a job to live. Now, a third type of theory of where government established its authority, as you move more towards like the Middle Ages, going after the Renaissance, and right before our American Revolution, kings, queens, they use this idea of divine right. And the idea is that God gave the power to that person to rule over everyone else. And so if you were a religious person at the time, which most people were practicing some form of religion, you would never go against the word of God. So the king would just simply look at the people and say, God, let me be king. I had a vision and God said that I should be the ruler over everyone else. And all of the laws and rules that the king would say, they would all go back to, well, God told me that I get to make this rule. God said that all of you people will obey me and give me your money, or God told me that you will live on this land and be a farmer for the rest of us. So it's a very controversial issue, needless to say, because as we move towards the Enlightenment period, people start to realize that they have more rights and that the king and queen should not necessarily be a more powerful figure than a commoner. So the last theory of where government is created, and this delves into more of a modern time, but when we get away from the period of kings and queens and we move more into the Enlightenment period where individual people become more educated, and you start to see large empires start to fall apart. We have people who now are deciding that we're just as equal probably as the king, and we understand we do need to be protected, and we're willing to give up some rights to be protected and have safety and security and jobs and food, that will give those rights up for a government to be created that will guarantee all of those things that we've just mentioned. So that's the point of a contract. When we look at who benefits from a contract, both parties benefit. It gives legitimacy to a government to be created and be put in place by the people. But that contract also is beneficial to protect the people. And like I said, going into, as we talked about in class, into our American Revolution, we feel that the king violated the contract by not protecting our basic rights, and so we have a revolution to overthrow the government and start over. And that is a big key difference between Thomas Hobbes and John Locke, which we talked about more in depth in class.